Hey, how are you guys? Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. So, what we're doing today is live with Julia, one of my friends from California in the U.S. And in this live, we're going to be talking about writing mostly, but we're also going to talk about other things. So, welcome everybody. I just came up a little bit early to give you guys time to come on in and join us. And hopefully it's going to be all okay. Hey, Anna, how are you? Good to have you. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Welcome, one and all. Oh, she's here. So let's go ahead and get her on. Go. So I've requested to Julia to join us. Let's see. Hi. Let's see if she'll get connected. Hey, Julia.
Hello.
Hi. You okay, my friend?
I am.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. It's 8:30 on Saturday morning.
Yeah, and it's 8 p.m. Saturday afternoon. Actually, Saturday evening. It's way past afternoon. Yeah. So, did you sleep well?
I did.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful. How are things on your neck of the woods, as Michelle would say?
It's quite hot over here. I live in Southern California, so it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit most days these days. So, air conditioning is a reason to live. To quote a Kevin Smith movie. But yeah, it's things are good. It's sunny and hot and summer and great.
All right, wonderful. So it's almost the same here, because I live in the south of Iran, and the south of Iran is like, Iran is a mountainous country.
Okay.
So although it may not be very stretched, okay, but when you just go 5 hours away from my city, there are ski resorts.
Oh.
Yeah, because you have to go up.
Snow right now?
There's still snow, right? But it's not good enough for skiing right now. But in a couple of months, it's going to be amazing. But you come to my city, and the air conditioning is a reason to live, my friend.
Yes, it is. Air conditioning is a reason
so,
to live.
Yeah, today, guys, I'm going to say it again, we have my dear friend, Julia. We have been friends since the beginning of the pandemic.
Yes, we have. You were a loyal follower of my shelter in place podcast that I had.
Because it was so good. I learned so much. Every time. Mm-hmm. Our time, it was 3 a.m. Your show.
Yeah.
And then I would try to stay awake and listen to the show. I just learned so much about your culture. Mm-hmm. I love learning about cultures. I learned so much English and a lot of health facts to keep me healthier through the pandemic.
No, we started it back in April of 2020. Michelle has had a podcast. My friend that I did it with, she's had a podcast for years, and she wanted to try out a new the Podbean had a new feature. She's like, hey, they have this live situation. Do you want to try it? We'll just talk about the pandemic. You and I are both doing research anyway on it. Sure, let's try. And that's kind of how it was started. But we had a lot of fun with it until it kind of fizzled out. But yeah, it was good.
Yeah, and you guys, what I remember is that you were so persistent, and I like the way that, because I guess I've told you before, a lot of people came on Podbean and left. I, myself, was one of them. But you guys, you guys were there like every Saturday, we were like committed. Clockwork. Yeah, you were very committed.
We were committed. We were definitely committed to it. And that was kind of part of the reason why I think We're both like that, though. We we're very routine based, the two of us.
Yeah.
So
Very, very scheduled people.
Yes.
With calendars.
Yes, we have calendars.
Yeah. Live and die by your calendar. That's what type of person you are.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but today we're not here to discuss the pandemic because thankfully it's not a pandemic anymore. It's more an epidemic.
Yes.
Mild one.
Yes.
We survived.
We survived.
Today we're here to discuss Julia's love writing.
Okay.
Now,
I do love writing, but yes, and how I can help you love writing. I think is part of it too.
I think when you love something, it's easier to make other people love it.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Because you can share the feelings with other people. Yeah. So I'm not going to go ahead and take any more of your time, my dearest friend Julia. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. But all I'm going to say before you start is that Julia has been very generous to share the knowledge that she has gathered over decades of work with us through 6 sessions of live. This session is just an introduction for the next 5 sessions. So on behalf of all the people watching this live, Julia, I would like to thank you for this amazing chance of learning that you have given to us. My friend, the stage is yours.
Perfect. So, my name is Julia Renee Black. I am a writer in the U.S., and I actually make my living by writing. There aren't very many of us that can do that or can say that they do that. I live in Southern California, like I said. I live in the Los Angeles area, about 50 miles east of there. Because I've spent my whole career writing, I can pretty much write any type of document. I'll just need to learn the rules of the document and then I can write it. Most of the writing that I do for work right now is related to marketing, which is essentially presenting a company to the world so that it gets more business. There's various different ways to do that, but that's the focus of what I do now. For my own enjoyment, I write in journals, I write blogs, I write letters to friends. Although, at times, sometimes I'll still get up in the middle of the night with an idea for a story. So I do write. I have written a novel that is not published. I've written some short stories. I've written some poems. So all that creative stuff I do as well. So that's me.
That's you.
That's me.
One and only Julia Renee Black. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Julia, my friend, in our syllabus, the one that you provided, you stated that you were going to talk about 5 different categories of writing. And I would much appreciate it if you could just walk us very gently through the aspects of each type of writing. What type of writing are you going to tell us about, and what's that writing about?
Sure. So next week, we're going to start on actual stories. Like if you wanted to write a short story or you wanted to write a novel or any kind of fiction story, we're going to focus on that. And the reason for that is because that everything that we're going to learn in next week's session will get built off of that, right? Because we are going to focus on storytelling throughout and how to incorporate storytelling into all these types of documents. And we'll get to why that's important in a second. But so next week, we're talking about actual stories. The week after that, we're going to do academic and scientific writing. The rules of that are obviously very different than the rules of writing a short story or a fiction novel. So if you want to write, if you're doing experiments and you need to write about that, or you're writing an essay for a class, we'll talk about how to do that.
And I'm just gonna go ahead and add something to that. So the first one, story writing, is something that I think will be quite interesting to students of English literature.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it was your major too, English literature.
Yes, I was in English literature. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it's going to be definitely interesting to those people mostly. But I'm sure that everybody would like to write a story every once in a while. So I think everybody can use that. And the second one, scientific writing, is something that is handy to every scholar who's pursuing their career in higher education, like master's or PhD. You guys are definitely going to be writing papers. And if you want to go international.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how it works. I don't know how, but even at your bachelor in America anyway, you're writing essays from when you're in 8th grade. So when you're 13, you start your academic writing at 13, and then it goes all the way. What do you learn there? Because all the way.
we get going from 20.
You start at 20. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We start at 13. So yeah. So it'll definitely help you when you're in college.
Yeah. So the first week is going to be storytelling. Second one is going to be academic and scientific. And what's next, ma'am?
After that, it's news articles, opinion pieces, and blogging.
Mm-hmm.
So there are very specific, and you may not have even noticed this, but most articles that you read have a very specific format. The very first paragraph tells you a summary of the whole article. So technically you only have to read that first paragraph and you'll get the gist of everything, even more so than like a headline, right? You'll get the gist of everything in that first paragraph, and then the rest of it just gives you more details. And then opinion pieces and blogging are kind of like that, but we're grouping them all together. After that, the week after that, we're discussing technical writing and business writing, which is what you'll do in an office once you start your career, depending on what career you've chosen. But there are very specific rules around that. Most people, at least in America, don't. When I tell people that I have been a technical writer, the first question is, what is a technical writer? And a technical writer, an unhelpful definition, but one that explains it well, is that a technical writer writes technical documents. It's generally the stuff that no one wants to read. It's your computer manuals. It's the manual that explains how your oven works. It's
how to enter an online class.
It's all of the stuff that no one wants to read, but is kind of vitally important. It's how to change the oil in your car, how to use the app for that your company is using. All of that is considered technical writing. And then the last week is going to be ad writing, copywriting, and marketing writing, which, interestingly enough, most people don't realize is quite creative. It can be very creative to write that.
And actually, to be really honest, because ever since I was 14 years old or 15 years old, and when I thought of my future, and I thought a lot of my future, and I still do, I saw myself as a person who has a factory and has people working there, getting people jobs. I grew up to find out that it actually has a name. It's called entrepreneurship. And there's an easier way to say it. And then this idea of having a factory just expanded to having a business and creating jobs for people. And ever since, I've been more interested in marketing and business than I've been interested in mechanical engineering, which is my major at university, or English teaching, which is my main source of income. I'm really interested in creating businesses, and I just love the challenges of it. I know sometimes you're going to fail. I have failed several times, but still love it. So
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to ad writing, marketing, and copywriting. Yes, ma'am.
This is one of those, it's interesting, right? So when I majored in English, so it was essentially a lit major, right? But when I majored in English, and when I was going to college, there still is a huge focus, but the focus had been on make sure that you major in something that you will use out in the workforce, whatever that's going to be. And an English major doesn't do that unless you want to become a teacher. But I didn't care because all of those other classes bored me to death. And if I had to sit through 4 years of studying, I was going to study something that I was interested in. But one of the things that they tell you, there was all these books, well, what can you do with an English major? And one of them was always that you could work for an ad agency, which we don't really have ad agencies so much now. It was really big in the 80s and the 90s. They're not quite so big now. Everyone
The
does
golden era.
Yeah.
90s. Oh my God.
I don't know about that. But yeah. So but there is, you could still find ad agencies out there. They focus on different things now, right? There's a lot more focus on when you're talking about marketing these days. You have to keep up with social media and how to get social media followers and which platforms are better for which types of businesses. And so we'll touch on a lot of those kinds of things and how to focus on that. But
okay.
But I also want to say that regardless of what we are the type of writing that we're talking about, we are going to focus on the importance of storytelling within it. And here's the reason why. As humans, we use story to connect with each other, right? So most of the stories that it's usually television or movies or books. We hear stories that way. But long before there was even writing, people sat and they talked to each other and they told stories to each other. This is how we connect. This is how we learn about each other. This is how we get to know each other, is by telling each other stories about our lives or about people that we know. Right?
And that's very interesting because when you look around, people who have a fascinating life story tend to be more charismatic.
They can be.
Because human beings love stories. You prefer to have somebody who had a lot of ups and downs in their lives as your coworker than somebody who just went straight to college and straight to work and straight to the top of the business. Yeah. That's boring. Come on.
No,
nobody likes that.
It's true. And I think because what's happened, interestingly enough, right, is that if I look at it and say, okay, why don't people know? Most people don't know how to tell a good story. They don't, right? We all have people that we've met that are starting that contribute, and I've done this myself. They contribute to a conversation and they start telling a story and you don't know where they're going with it. You don't know how they're contributing to your point. They go off on a tangent, right? We've all kind of done that. But there's a very specific way to tell a story, and most of us don't really learn it because we don't learn how to do it ourselves. We don't hear enough people telling good stories to be able to know how to do that. And unless you're taking some kind of a creative writing class, you're not really going to learn how to do it either. And certainly if you're trying to incorporate story into an essay or a paper for your teacher, for your professor, it's going to be a lot harder for you to adapt that. So throughout the series, we're not only going to talk about what the rules of that particular type of writing are, we're going to talk about some ways that you can incorporate story into it so that the writing is fun, so it's more fun to write and so it's more fun to read.
That's actually just when you were talking about it, and I was thinking of ways that you could connect marketing ads to telling a story, and I just remembered one of my students, and she's a very smart girl. She came up to me and she said, Farbot, which is the pronunciation of my name in Farsi, Farbot, your posters are boring, man. Nobody likes to look at them. And I was like, well, how can I make it better? She said, what you need is a story. People should follow something to get to your point. And I was like, okay, what do you suggest? And she said, instead of putting one poster saying, okay, we have these classes, you learn these, this is the number, come call us. You can have a series of posters right next to one another, something that people want to follow to get to something. I did that. And I swear to God, I had never seen that much marketing yield in my whole not many years of life. So
but it was a quick, right? It's important to tell the story. You want to make sure
it was so influential.
And it was just a simple fix. There was probably more work involved in creating the 5 posters, right? But they still told the story, and you got a lot more people in.
Definitely.
So yeah, it's very important. But I also want to make sure that we define what I'm talking about in regards to storytelling, right? Because we're not talking about, because incorporating story into a technical, into your toaster manual, is not going to look the same as a story that you're going to write that's a short story, right? That's fiction. So a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? So what you say at the beginning, what you say at the middle is connected to what's at the beginning. What you say at the end is connected to what's in the middle and at the beginning, right? So you want it to have some kind of flow, so that it has a logical order. And you want to include the most important parts, because you don't want to be like that person that's telling you about something that happened in kindergarten when they're trying to make a point and you can't find it. So that's important to know. And then the other thing is that a story has a point that you're trying to make, right? In a novel, it's called a theme. In an essay or an academic paper, it's your thesis. In marketing, it's the message you want the world to see about your business. Everything has a point. And then, so if you keep that in mind, the story, whatever you incorporate, is somehow attached to the point that you're trying to make in your paper.
And I think that's what oftentimes people miss. I actually learned this in the most unexpected of places, in a dynamics of machines class. You wouldn't expect to learn that there.
And wouldn't expect to learn it there.
Yeah, definitely. And then the professor, who was a capable engineer, he came on and he said, you know what your kid's problem is? And we were like, no, what is us kids' problem, sir? and he was like, you get too carried away with the looks of what you want to design and with the details of what you want to make. You want it to have Wi-Fi connection. You want it to, I don't know, go this fast. You want it to be bulletproof. You want it to fly. Did you totally forget about the point of why you're building the thing in the first place? Why are you building it? And after that, it was like a complete turning point in my whole mindset towards building and designing. Before I even touched the mouse, I would sit down and think, what do I want this to do for me? And then I would say, okay, I wanted to do this. Now, in order to do this, I need to have A, I need to have B, I need to have C. Everything else comes later in the updates. I'm going to be happy with A, B, and C for now. And I think that's the point that people miss many times in writing a story, or, I don't know, writing a thesis. They become carried away with complex grammatical structures trying to show off their English, or they become so carried away with describing the details of the places in their story that they totally forgot about the point of why they're writing that.
Right. And I think, and in addition to that, right, particularly when you're writing so that a professor, because the professor is going to grade you, right? You want to impress the professor, But the professor is not looking to be impressed. The professor is looking, the professor's not going to be impressed by the words you use. They're not going to care, how many different types of words that you're using, that you're using a word that hardly anybody uses. Your professor is going to be impressed about how well your paper flows, whether or not you're proving your point, and whether it's easy to understand. Once I learned that it really wasn't about impressing the professor as much as it was about logically proving my point, it didn't matter what I used, what words I used, because as long as you can as long as your sentence structure is correct enough and you're able to convey your ideas, then you're doing well.
Definitely. And I just remembered a sentence that you've quoted in your website. And I cannot remember it. Would you mind saying it?
Is it the hold on. Let me get it. I know exactly which one you're talking about. It's on my signature block too.
Writing is
about using big words to impress. It's about using simple words in an impressive way.
Yeah.
That's a quote from Sierra Bailey.
Yeah. And I guess that is really something that we need to incorporate in everything, not just writing. So you need to, as the Americans say, get the job done.
Get the job done. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's all you need to do.
Yeah. No, and this is one of those things that within writing, like there are a lot of writers that use a lot of words. And I'm often, because I write in a business setting, and I write with people that really don't necessarily love writing, I'll often see something and I'll just go, oh God, there's so many words. Like, can we just not have so many words? And so I'm constantly just deleting phrases. Do we need this? No. How can we convey the sentence without using these things? Because again, so there was a time, and a lot of people don't know this, but there was a time in history, in writing history, when authors were paid by the word. So Charles Dickens, who wrote,
The Tale of Two Cities?
A Tale of Two Cities and A Christmas Carol, he was paid by the word. So his books go on and on and on and on. And there can, he can have descriptions of the landscape that go on for pages that don't necessarily do much to keep you in the story. Sometimes that's necessary for the story, particularly if you're writing science fiction or fantasy, you're going to want a thorough description of the background and the setting. But in England, in London, in the 1700s, everyone knew what it looked like, so we don't need to go on for pages about it, right? We're not there anymore, particularly in America, and I don't know how things work in other English-speaking countries, but particularly in America, there has been the last 10, 15 years, we're scaling down. What can you say in the fewest amount of words? And this Twitter's a very good example, right? Like everything is small, little, how many characters are you using? So if you could say something simply and in a few amount of words, then that's the best way to go.
Definitely. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that the world these days is just so fast. Mm-hmm. It's just so fast. People don't have time to read. People don't have time to write. So, or at least they think they don't have time to read and write.
It's not a priority.
It's not a priority. So you need to get the message delivered as soon as possible. Like I remember I was in an entrepreneurship course, and they said that if you want your poster to be successful, because they gave us an example of the posters that we use at university, it's literally a short story, not a poster. First of all, everything is written in such a small size. You need a magnifying glass to read it. And then there's so much detail, and you don't know where to start. And then you say, oh, you know what? I don't need it. I'm not going to read it. But they said that if you want to have a successful, I'm sorry, if you want to have a successful poster, it needs to be fully read, or at least it needs to make the point in 3 seconds, because that is the longest people are going to look at your poster. If you're lucky, and they're going to look for 3 seconds. If they get it, they've got it. If they don't, goodbye. So I think,
yeah. And that's the same way when you're looking at websites, right? So if I'm writing website copy, the first thing I'll do is I'll go to someone's website and I'll look at it and I'll say, okay, you know, most of the time, most small businesses think that their website needs to be a resume of all of the things that the business does. And it does to an extent, but it needs to take a different focus, right? With a website, with anything marketing, your goal is to prove to somebody else that they should be using the business. So if I'm looking at it, if I'm looking at a website and the website says all of the great things that we do, but we don't tell the client why they should use us, then they're not going to use it. No one's going to spend any time there. No one cares about the fact that sure, they'll care about the fact that the business, they care about longevity, right? So if the business has been around for 50 years, that's an important point. If the business but they're not going to care about any of the awards that the business has received. They're not going to care about whether or not, unless you're a doctor or a lawyer, they're not going to care about where you went to school. They're not going to care about any of it. What they're going to, what is this business going to do for me? So the websites should always talk to how they're helping the client. And that is the hardest thing for people to understand. And it's really hard for people to write. Like I've written websites, I've talked to authors that are trying to sell their books on their website, and they'll write all of the text for their website, but they won't do anything to talk about why anybody should read their books. They just talk about the book. And so they're not selling any books. But I'm a writer, so I can write it. Okay. But you're writing it the way you're writing your book. And you can't write it the way you wrote your book. You have to write it
interesting
about who's looking at it, who your audience is.
I see. That's you just gave me a whole new perspective of life.
It's a completely different way of different way of writing. It's a completely different way of marketing. It's a completely different way of looking at everything.
It really is. Now, let's bring it back to the top of the list. Next week, we're going to be talking about storytelling. The week after that, academic and scientific writing. The week after that, news, opinion, and blogging. And after that, technical and business. So we talked about technical writing, talked about ad and copy and marketing. I'm guilty of taking too much of your time because it's my main area of interest. But let's talk a little about storytelling. So what are we going to learn about storytelling? And how should we look at storytelling?
So when you're writing any kind of fiction, right, you're going to be you need to have a very clear idea of your characters and what they're going to go through. Because without conflict, right? So if we're talking about literature, there's many different types of conflict. So we'll talk about different conflict scenarios, which the story would then be based on. So you figure out what the main conflicts are. There's often more than one depending on how long your story is. Who your characters are, what you want them to look like and act like and be like, and then how those characters relate to the conflict, and then how it's going to be resolved. And then associated with that, once you have that figured out, then you figure out what your themes are. You probably can, you either figure out what your themes are and surround your conflict and your storyline based on that, or you create the conflict in the storyline and then you figure out what your themes are. But either way, once you have that pinpointed, then that helps you structure the way that the story goes.
So I remember you were talking about a writer about 3 months ago, I guess, when we were just starting to talk about the concept of these lives. And you said, I don't remember her name, but you said that she just gets up in the morning and she says, okay, today I'm going to write this part of the story. And then she gets up the next morning and she says, okay, I'm going to write a mile away from where I wrote yesterday. And then she has people who come around and put these pieces together like a puzzle.
Like a puzzle.
And then she writes the whole story. So what type of writing would you call that?
So that writer is Diana Gabaldon. She wrote, she has written there a few different series of books. The main one that most people know of in America is called Outlander. And so the important thing to know about how you write is the way that your creativity works, right? For me, for various reasons, I have to work from beginning to end. So if I'm going to write a story, I have to generally start at the beginning. I can't start in the middle because my brain has to be logical that way. It has to be chronological that way. But I've actually known other writers that do this too. So even if a writer does work that way, where they write in pieces and then they put them all together like a puzzle at the end, they still have an idea in their head of how the book is going to be outlined and what it's going to, and what the main conflicts are and how each of the characters relate to those conflicts. And then like for her, she'll wake up one morning and go, oh, today's the day that we're talking about this character doing this thing. And then, but she already knows where that fits generally within the sequence of the book. So she's got it organized. It's just the way that she's managing her creativity, right? Writers are still, what a lot of writers don't realize, writers are still creatives. So if you ever met like an artist who paints or who sculpts or
plays music,
they talk about their process, and it's so abstract that you can't even really understand it. It's just, they live in a spot that has no words, right? Artists generally live in a place in their head where there are very few words so that they can create their art and be their kind of brilliant selves. Writers are still those super creative people, but the words are incorporated. But depending on how your creativity works, it's a matter of managing your creativity within the confines of writing, right? We're much more limited. So then, an artist with a paintbrush where they can paint something wonderful and then tell you afterwards what it is. And it's like, oh, I didn't see that. I have no idea. I had no idea that's what it was until I looked at it. Right. So chances are, whenever you're writing in a creative sense, you have to know how your brain and your creativity will work. And the only way to do that is to experiment.
Get your feet wet.
Is to experiment. Well, with all writing, right, is that the only way to become a better writer is to do more writing. And people who hate writing but want to become writers don't like to hear that. Or even if they don't want to become writers, they need to, for whatever reason, they need to write for work, or they have to write, someone is asking them to write something. The only way to do better at writing is to write more. So you have to find ways to write more so that you figure out what your process is.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. That was a new look inside the head of a writer. Okay. So let's move it on to academic and scientific writing. You already pointed out that in an academic or scientific essay, well, in where I live, it gets serious from the last year of your bachelor's when you're 22. And then when you go into your master's and you go into your PhD, and I'm talking about a normal human being here, you're going to have to do a lot of writing. You're going to have to do a lot of reading. And so it is in that age when people start to write academically. Now, what is the key towards writing it successfully? How should we look at this?
I think organization is everything, really. And you know, academic writing, the kind of paper that you're going to write for a history class is going to look different than the kind of paper that you're going to write for a scientific class, for a science class, right? Where you're writing experiments and stuff. So we'll go through the different ways that those papers look, because they look a little bit different. But the key with everything is organization. You want to have, you know, your thesis or kind of your hypothesis. If you're talking about scientific writing, it'll be the hypothesis. With the other types of writing, it's your thesis. And then you want to organize the rest of the paper to prove that, or to disprove it, right? If your experiment didn't prove your hypothesis, then that's your point, that the hypothesis was wrong.
Yeah. Well, we sometimes see people who get to that point where they realize that they were wrong, but they just go ahead and create numbers and prove themselves right.
We're not going to talk about creative proving. We're going to assume that if your experiment proves that your hypothesis is wrong, then your hypothesis is wrong. But I think so. Once you know what you're trying to prove, then you need to then what you do is you outline your arguments for that thesis or hypothesis, what those arguments are.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And the last one on our list is actually the middle session, news, opinion, and opinion pieces and blogging. So what is that?
So a news article, generally, like I said before, right? The first paragraph of every news article will give you a summary of the whole thing. And it answers 5 questions. Who, what, where, when, why. Oh, sorry, 6 questions. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. All of those questions will be answered in the first paragraph of every news article.
Interesting.
And then the rest of the article will then go into more detail about each of those questions. When you're talking about opinion pieces and blogging, you're generally, this is actually like kind of close to the way that my podcast worked with Michelle, right? We knew there was a topic that we were talking about that we assume everybody knows about, right? And then we give our opinion and kind of a thesis. It's a combination of an academic paper and a news article. We give our opinion and we have all of our, we want to prove a point, and we give all of our reasons for why we want to prove that point. So if I'm taking a news article that talks about climate change, right? So we talk about climate change, and then what we'll do is, okay, we all know that this happened in climate change this week. I don't think that was a good idea. I don't think it's going to further help the climate. Here are the reasons why. But it's generally kind of a persuasive academic paper that just talks more about your opinion. And blogging can do the same thing. It's usually done in a shorter amount of words. There are fewer words in a blog than in a kind of newspaper opinion piece. And they're usually a little bit more entertaining. I mean, you can have blogs. We do have blogs. Like I have blogs for my business. I have blogs that are focused on kind of writing and newsletters and you know, when are you going to need a business blog, and when are you just going to need to send out a newsletter? I've got blog posts about that kind of stuff. You're using your knowledge of a subject matter to present a small little reason why somebody should do something or shouldn't do something, or believe one way or not believe one way.
Thank you very much. I totally got it. And I think it's something that we generally use on social media. I guess social media is a type of blogging.
It can be. I think it depends on what type of social media you're using, right? But yeah, it can be, certainly.
All right.
Much shorter.
Much shorter. Definitely. Thank you so very much, Julia. You have been a wonderful teacher. Thank you. And so I've got it all summed up here, and I believe that next session, same time, people, if you want to know about all the things that Julia said right now in detail, you're going to have to follow us for the next 5 sessions. Next session, we're going to be talking about storytelling. The same time on Saturday, same pages. You can either follow us or you can follow Julia, Blacksmith Writing, and you can join us and learn.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so very much, Julia. You have been wonderfully patient with me. I know I'm not very good at writing, but thank you very much. And if you would like to add anything, we're all ears.
No, I think I'm excited about this. I think it's going to be really
so
fun.
Am I.
I'm super, you know, I can't wait to start with this. But thanks for having me.
Neither can I. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and take care, and bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. She is just the kindest. Okay, so guys, I hope that you will follow us next week on Saturday. Same time. It's gonna be 8 p.m. Tehran time, and if you're joining us from the US, it's gonna be 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. So we're going to be talking about storytelling. I would very much appreciate it if you guys would join us on the next session. And until then, take care and bye-bye.